Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to the show. Today, Vegan World 2026 Moonshot podcast. Today, we have Mike the Vegan joining us, and we are going to be talking about how to tell our story, how to get people to see the obvious that's just sitting in front of their eyes and they don't see it, you know? So it's fascinating to see the inertia in humanity. So let me get Mike on.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Good to be here. Thanks for
Virtually.
joining us. Yes. Yeah. You know, that comic behind us, that was done by Marguerite from Norway. She just
I like it.
said, how can we help? And she said, I can do cartoons, I can do comics. And so
Yeah, it's a nice animation style.
yeah, I mean, it is literally, this is what's going on. I remember when I first started looking at this back in 2006, I looked at the land use numbers and I said, good God, I mean, if we just return the grazing lands back to forests, can we not reverse climate change? So that was, that was the first question I asked Al Gore during the training that happened in 2006. And he basically looked at Roy Neal, his chief of staff, and he said, how did this guy get in here?
That's pretty great.
He didn't want to hear it, And I thought maybe I'm doing these simple calculations. Maybe there is something more complicated going on. And the more you look at it, no, it is just as simple. It is like the little girl saying the emperor has no clothes.
Yep. So, with the land use, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us your experience. How have you been tackling this?
Well, before I get into that, I just want to mention it's funny how I've come to the exact same place that you've been just by looking at my own numbers. So I remember thinking, that's a lot of land use I see from the USDA. And then I went, what would just happen if we planted those with trees and had the average tree sequestration? So, find a paper used by the government on sequestration from trees, just multiply that by the amount of hectares. And boom, we've got 90% of all of emissions sequestered, even using the average. So that's you're absolutely right about that. Anyway, to answer the question, how do I go about it? I feel like I've tried to fill a particular niche, which is try to get the information out there in a sort of ADD friendly, not to shame anybody with ADD, but YouTube people just want to get the information, boom, 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 boom. So I essentially just try to keep a fast pace, keep the information going, try to get all of the best sources cited for everything, and have a good time while doing it. Because I feel like if you're not having a good time, then people aren't going to have as good of a time, and then they're not going to be as likely to watch. And so that's my attitude. Try to just give people a little bit of interesting information sprinkled in with my evil motives of getting everybody to do the right thing for animals and the environment. So that's my angle. Yeah.
I see you as the Michael Greger of the environmental movement,
A little bit. I could be more environmentally focused. I should be more. Some people do say you're like young Michael Greger, which is, I'll take it. I think he's great. So he's definitely an inspiration. Been a little bit of inspiration for my style. Like I watched his videos before I started YouTubing at all. So a little bit of that snuck in subconsciously. So yeah.
I mean, just telling the facts, right? So getting people
for sure
the facts, yeah.
And just showing a study on screen is something that people weren't really doing as much. And so I'll just give him credit there in terms of flashing studies.
Right. Yeah. Flashing studies and then highlighting the appropriate remarks, right? So exactly. People can see it. Yeah. So do you focus on animal rights more than environment? What do you
focus on health. I mean, if I go through my videos, it's like one of the recent ones I did was like, is just egg healthy? And before that, I mean, all of my most viewed videos are about health, whether it's my most viewed video, I think, is how your body transforms on a vegan diet. And then I've done a bunch of other health videos. I mean, it's 2/3 health. I mean, so it is a little bit more into the Greger territory. But I also go about videos differently. So like he'll do shorter videos where he's talking over it, and I'm doing slightly longer videos right now. So
yeah, he focuses more on the medical literature, directly. So so do you see your health videos getting more views than others?
Oh, for sure. And it's kind of my fault because it's what I was originally interested in. So that's what originally got me onto the train. And so that's the first videos I started making. That's the audience I started getting. And so that's the people who are subscribed to me want to see health. They also want to see environmental stuff as well. It's not as viewed. It's maybe 2/3 as many views. And then the animal stuff, unfortunately, gets like 1/3 as many views. But I still try to get it in every video. Like if I'm talking about health at the end, I'll still be like, and it's better for the animals and it's better for the environment. Usually I'll have like a statement like that at least.
Right. Yeah. I mean, ultimately it's the unraveling of supremacy,
Yeah. That's what I've been on lately is, we have the idea of being vegan, but then I'm also just all about total liberation is sort of like the greater structure that I feel like I'm viewing under, whether it's humans who are being treated poorly in, working in the factory, right. or then that just is an umbrella that it becomes obvious to liberate animals as well. So,
yeah. So do you get into those areas of, what's happening to people who are living near factory farms and
yeah. I try to do it more often. Or I need to do it more often, but I have a video, Vegan for Human Rights, and it's even more. Yeah, it's. I live in Iowa, so I probably have in the county just near me, north of me. I think there's like 1 million pigs, and so I'm surrounded by pig farming. There's more pigs than people in Iowa. I think it's 7-to-1. It might be up to like a 9-to-1 ratio now. So I firsthand know what it's like for people to be right near a pig farm. I've lived right near a smaller one, which was interesting. But the big ones, they obviously have a massive effect, psychologically and health-wise. There's a pretty good argument to be made as well. But, that's mainly an animal issue. That's what I would say.
No, but in Iowa, are they allowed to spray the pig waste in the air?
Yes, they are. Mostly what happens is they have this slat system. This is called hog slats, and so the manure goes under it and sort of gets into this reservoir, and then they suck it out, and then they use that as like fertilizer. And sometimes it just smells really bad. I don't know if that's as common as a practice here, because pigs don't create as much solid waste as cows do, I think. So the places where they have cows, it's like happening a lot, especially dairy cows, as you probably know, create a ton of waste. And so here it happens. You don't really see it here. It's usually you'll see like the massive ammonia based synthetic fertilizers, and then sometimes they'll even fly that over. So I don't know. It might just be a matter of economics, or what it is I don't see that as much because I don't currently live directly next to one. So
yeah. Overall, worldwide, we have cut half the trees on the planet over the last 10,000 years.
Sounds about right.
And we have increased the animal biomass by an order of magnitude, just so that we can eat them, right? And then we wonder, does this have anything to do with climate change? Does this have anything to do with the problems we're facing? Cannot possibly.
Crazy. I know. Now we're at 15 times the amount of domesticated mammal biomass as wild mammal biomass, as you probably know. So that's a figure that just puts it into perspective. We went from obviously 0 domesticated animals to 15 times as many, at least mammals. I think for birds, it's a little less exaggerated because there's massive flocks of wild birds still, but that's telling. Yeah. So we got to get those trees back.
You got to get those trees back, and the animals, stop producing them like they're widgets, right? So that's what we're doing, literally. So as an engineer, it just I find it astounding that people are not able to see these things, because as engineers, we are trained to look at the truth and accept it as quickly as possible, because otherwise you're going to be wasting your time.
Yeah, I would say the average person is trained to be an engineer, in the sense that they are putting their head in the sand and by purposefully not looking at this stuff, because unfortunately, if you're part of a system, it becomes a lot easier to just look away than not look away. And I've been there too, especially, as somebody who has a good example of me still feeling like I do that a little bit is, I still have to drive I still have like a hybrid and stuff. And I built an electric motorcycle, which I'm going to be trying to drive as much as possible soon. But it's, I still like the fact that I'm still engaged in fossil fuel use, like just makes me cringe so hard. And there's times where, you try to kind of see your brain trying to justify it a little bit. Oh, it's just a little bit, like I don't have another option, blah, blah, blah. And those are some of the same excuses. So I try to understand that psychology, but it really is like, if you're involved in directly paying for animals to be killed in the system, like you're going to be so much more likely to just be an engineer. Like,
right. Yeah, with fossil fuels also, for me, it is when I started unraveling this back in 2008, 2009, I realized that everything I do has an impact. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to minimize what I do. But then I've been given these tools to do what is right. So you have that dichotomy that you have to balance and see, okay, what is it that, what are you doing it for? So that's how I started looking at it. What am I doing it for? If I'm doing it for the larger good, I say, go ahead and do it. But if I'm doing it for something for myself, of course not. I don't want to do that, So I started something called the Buy Everything Day. I don't know if you know that.
It sounds kind of familiar. I might have saw something online about it.
Yeah.
Explain it again, though.
Yeah, because I was invited to join a Buy Nothing Day group on Facebook. And this is a group where people resolve not to buy anything on the day after Thanksgiving. That's the Buy Nothing Day club. And I said, my God, we've reached a state of such mechanical buying and consumption that we have to have a day to say, no, we're not going to buy anything on this day. So I said, no, what about if we do the opposite? So you buy nothing on every day, and there's one day in which you go buy everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. 364 days of not buying anything versus one day replacing Black Friday. Sounds like what they're trying to do. Yeah. Or you could say buy everything eco on Black Friday. If, support all of the eco products that are out there as well would be a good one. But yeah, that's great. If you can go 364 days without buying anything.
Right. I said, okay, I'm going to buy food. Now, I don't I don't want to just eat canned food. But everything else, I was going to make a list. Then I started doing that, okay? And I started making a list. And then I realized at the end of the year, when I looked at that list, I really didn't need any of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm definitely a minimalist. I really try to be like, we have a tiny house, which I'm not in right now, but we built it with the idea of minimalism. And for anybody that watches my channel knows that I've been wearing like the same 6 shirts for the last 5 years. So they know that's partially laziness, partially because I want to go out and buy stuff that I don't really need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Ultimately, Murray Gell-Mann said, right? He said, underneath surface complexity, there is a deep simplicity.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's really not that complicated. You just have to be kind to all life and recognize that you're serving them. You're not here to boss them.
Yeah, and then going back, though, to buying stuff, make everything. 365, make everything. Like I was saying, one of the things I'd made is, or I guess I just said I had an electric motorcycle. One of my recent projects was taking a 70s motorcycle and converting it to electric. So stripping off all the internal combustion engine stuff, grabbing some old Nissan Leaf cells modules, which you can buy on eBay, getting a little motor in the back. I shouldn't say little because it weighs like 45 pounds. It's big. And just learning how to do it, putting everything together. And so now I have this electric motorcycle that I'm really excited. I'm not going to drive too fast or be dangerous or anything. Always going to wear a helmet, drive it around town. But that's an example of, boom, you can plug it into solar. And now you're completely disconnected from fossil fuels.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So are you an engineer? So tell us about your background.
Yeah, I have a bachelor's of science in sustainability. I'm currently studying for a master's in public health. But that was a little bit, we got into a little bit of the bootleg projects in that. A lot of it was big theory about renewable energy and just the mechanics of climate change. But then also it's funny. There was a little bit of word even back then. We're going to talk about this in a second. A little bit of word of like Alan Savory and regenerative grazing in that. So that shows how wide of a breadth the program had. But we still had little, like we made example of a project we had was a bike generator. So it was a recumbent bike, an old one that we took an old motor and we hooked it up to the pedals and then hooked a battery up and stuff. And we made a little bicycle generator, so human powered generator, and then ran a blender on it. Stuff like that was some examples, made a little recycled bike trailer, fun stuff like that kind of got me thinking in that direction. And then my final project was doing algae biofuel, sort of little bioreactor design. And so, growing algae for fuel. So you basically just pump the oil out of it, press the oil out of it, and you can make diesel out of it. So that's basically solar to fuel. The problem is it's very high cost right now. So it's basically only used for jet fuel, I think, in the actual economy. Right. But it was fun project to like think about and learn about for me. So that's my background. I never really I've never got an engineering degree, but I've done a lot of like bootleg engineering. I sort of accidentally became an industrial designer for 5 years, working with like water filtration and stuff right before I started my YouTube. So that's sort of my background. I really like doing physical stuff. I've done 3D modeling and things like that since I was 16. So for me, that's fun. And it's just fun to work with my hands and put stuff together. So yeah, there's background.
So did you find that during the pandemic, people were more receptive? That's a question that came.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. In some ways, yes. In other ways, no. I think some people have been so worried about just getting by that they've like being vegan a lot of times is doing an extra thing for others or for animals. And so I at least witnessed the entire vegan YouTube get less views than normal. I don't know why, but then I also realized that there really was an extra focus of people who did realize that there was an animal connection, because a lot of people still deny that animal connection, which is completely, I mean, even if you want to say that there was something else that happened, that 99.9% of that genetic material came from animal viruses and the interaction between humans and animals, and animals, us trafficking pangolins around the world is pretty much the main culprit still.
Right.
And so there were people that came along being like, this is a major motivator for me. And now it's considered the fourth motivator, but still health. So I still consider it part of the animal's health environment, but you could say animal's health environment, pandemic, or like infectious diseases, which is still health. But I still I like the idea that it's another motivator, and it should be another motivator. And people really need to learn about the connection. I mean, the most prime example, not to ramble too hard about it, but that 1918 pandemic known as the Spanish flu most likely came from a Kentucky chicken farm. So we have this idea with this one as well. I think that prevents people from hopping on board with SARS-CoV-2, where they say, oh, it was off in a far off land with some animals that I don't eat, or we don't eat here. So it wasn't we're actually the victims of this one. That's kind of the mentality, and a little bit of xenophobia in that as well. But the chicken that we grow on a small farm, not even a factory farm, 100 years ago, is what caused the most lethal flu pandemic. So take that as you will.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, when we look back and see in everything that has happened, and now we are unraveling it, right? Slowly we are figuring out, oh, that's what happened there.
Yeah.
That's how we got that. And I think thanks to people like Dr. Greger, who sit around doing research on this, So in terms of the videos themselves, are you finding that people are more interested in shorter and shorter videos, or is it still the same?
See, that's an interesting thing about YouTube, is you're constantly battling the algorithm. And in the past, people making videos under 10 minutes would get hit hard. They would not be promoted as well because there's less watch time, which means less ads per video. And so my rule became always make a video over 10 minutes. And right now I'm realizing, again, I feel like things have shifted, that they don't want to see as long videos and more likely to click on somewhat shorter videos. I think everybody's kind of like, I got to do stuff. Even though they don't really have anything to do, it's just a little level of like urgency up, just in the collective consciousness. But I basically am going, I started getting up closer to 20, 50. I was like between 15 and 20 every time. And now I've decided, instead of doing one video this long, this last week I totally failed, made a 15-minute video again, but I'm going to try to do 2 videos a week, more often, shorter videos. So, 2 7 to 10-minute videos. And I'm just going to test the algorithm. I think it's going to do better. We'll see.
So do you have any access to what they're doing in the algorithm, or do they not tell you that?
It's the black box that we are all victims of. You can see, basically looking at analytics, you can kind of get an idea. You can go, okay, well, this shorter video got more views, but it's so variable. It could just be the topic. It could be something about the thumbnail. It could be about that. So you can maybe look at 10 videos and 10 videos. So, okay, so these 10 videos under 10 minutes got this many views, these 10 videos over. Who knows? So I have to do that work. You can kind of mine the analytics for some hints at the algorithm. But in general, you just know that the YouTube algorithm wants people to stay on YouTube and watch as many ads as possible for as long as possible, which I don't even view as healthy. I just want people to watch enough of my videos that it's getting out there.
Yeah, ultimately we are sort of, we are still being dangled by the man. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's all about ad revenue. And that's why it's nice to have, I have a Patreon too. It's nice to have that support so I can go, all right, if my videos are not getting as many views this week, I don't have to panic. I still sometimes panic if it's a longer trend. And a simple example of that is back onto the regenerative grazing topic, is I spent so much time researching this video. It's 20 minutes long, did all this extra editing, and then it's like half as many views as normal because not that many people even really are familiar with regenerative grazing, even though the people that are think of it as gospel and as the solution to climate change, and their excuse, I got a hair in my mouth, their excuse to keep eating meat and making it the solution. And so we can talk about that a little bit if you want to.
Yeah, please. Tell us what you found.
Okay, so basically we have the main drive to push regenerative grazing is actually coming from massive company you're probably familiar with, General Mills. So General Mills owns Epic Provisions, which is this like sort of greenwashed jerky company. Basically, they got like the buffalo meat and all this stuff, and you've probably seen it in health food stores actually. And they work with a farm called White Oak Pastures, and so the 3 of them have been at this for a few years to try and make their meat look carbon negative, actually. And so they came out with a Qantas report, a privately funded report, which was like, oh, look, this is carbon negative. And it was you just look at it and you go, this obviously isn't peer reviewed. There's something going on here. The numbers just do not add up at all. They're saying that it's a lower impact than Beyond Burger. And even just straight soybeans. And they're saying it's because it's sequestering this carbon. And then the closer you look, you realize they're doing all sorts of things like undercounting methane, ignoring the saturation that happens in the soil after about 15 years with grazing a livestock system. And then it became a whole nother thing when they actually got to the peer-reviewed literature. The same people that authored that report recently came out with a study. And it shows that the first one was majorly exaggerated because, of course, they were not sequestering any carbon, or they were not carbon negative at all in the White Oak Pastures farm, because it was the same farm. And so it went from being carbon negative to being 60% lower emissions than your average conventional livestock farm. But then here's the thing: it used 2.5 times as much land, and they did a bunch of fertilization of the fields with chicken feed, a ton of chicken feed. And so you add these things up, and it's like, you're taking all this carbon from over there, you're putting it on there, and you're, probably, from what we've looked at, undercounting methane and all of these things. You just, like, for example, they're looking at the standard 100-year time frame with methane, which you can't do because it's extremely powerful in the first 10 to 20 years. And so you start looking at that, all of a sudden they're not, you can compare that directly to conventional also emitting more, but boom, their carbon equivalents go way up. And then you calculate that based off the amount of land use we already have for livestock, 2.5 times the conventional system would just be the entire planet. Like, so basically they're saying the solution is to probably cut down every tree on Earth, use cover all of our habitable land. Basically, I think it was in the 90s, about 90%
Right.
of all habitable land, and cover that with pigs or not pigs with well actually they have a multi animal system, so it would be it would be cows and pigs and chickens. And so let's just throw away planet Earth so that we can produce the same amount of meat that we're producing now with this regenerative grazing, which again actually becomes what happens. You know about this, where the soil, especially in a grass system, especially one where you're chomping at the top, you sequester some carbon, and then at about 15 years, you're sequestering nothing.
Right.
And that's soil carbon saturation. And so, like I say, imagine buying an electric car that at 10 years just turns into a combustion engine. And that's basically what happens. So that's my, that's what I was focusing on recently. So if you see any claims by White Oak Pastures, General Mills, or Epic Provisions about environmental stuff, that's all greenwashing. It's all coming directly from massive corporations to try and get beef, which is one of the most, people view it now as one of the least eco-friendly foods on the planet, is all of a sudden the solution. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been looking at it from an opportunity cost point of view, So, I mean, what could you have done on that land if you didn't grow this, right? So, and we know that a lot of the grasslands used to be forests in 1800. Yeah. So from that perspective, to me, regenerative grazing is someone coming along and saying, we won't do the pasture maintenance fires anymore. Okay. So we won't do that. There'll be less for your cows to eat if you don't do that.
Yeah.
So
I also should credit Tushar Mehta, because he was in that video, and he had a lot of great points on there too. And so you should check him out at plantbaseddata.org. They've got
I know him.
Yeah, he's great, out of Toronto. So, and then another thing that's interesting is just the idea of just the grass and what it can do and what different systems can sequester. So obviously we have these roots of these grass systems, and they're maybe going down 3 feet. Like that's the ideal situation. Maybe you can get down to 6 feet, who knows, with these grass systems. But then compared to even a native prairie, where you have something like big blue stem that goes down to like 12 feet or more for a root, and then probably has a better relationship with the soil microorganisms, like the fungal mycorrhizal networks. But then trees, massive carbon being sequestered. So they're the obvious solution. Oh, I got a question for you. What do you think about the idea that trees aren't the answer, because they have a darker surface and would absorb more heat? That's one I've heard. They would absorb more heat. So
yeah,
look at that.
I mean, the albedo effect, right? So they absorb heat in order to turn that into photosynthesis, right? So I mean, what are they doing with that heat? See, I mean, we have this whole mechanism of, looking at things at the surface and saying, oh, there's energy being absorbed in there, so therefore it's going to heat up the earth. No, it's not heating up the earth. The tree is using it to grow itself and to transpire water. So it's creating this whole water cycle along with that. So it's much more complex than just looking at albedo.
Yeah, that's a good point about just looking at the system in a more complete way. And that brings me actually back to a point I forgot about with the regenerative grazing and the methane in the cows. And that is that we do, and I'm guilty of it too, because that's the numbers that are available, is that we look at, okay, what is a single cow emitting? We go, okay, let's just multiply that by the amount of cows that we see in the system. And they're finding that is undercounting methane. And there's a paper that I cover in my video, Regenerative Grazing Debunked, that says, no, we actually, if you do a top-down, use better tools, better surveillance, do atmospheric testing right above these large cattle systems, you're actually measuring the whole system in the air. You see that we're undercounting cattle methane by about, it was 39 to 90%, which is huge. I mean, if we're almost, like possibly only counting half as much methane as these systems are emitting, that is huge right there as well. And I would love to see some people look more into that. So
yeah, well, that will open up a whole can of worms, because that means that if you're undercounting methane, then how do you explain the overall concentration in the atmosphere? Is the half-life of methane being also undercounted?
Well, either way, if they're doing the 100-year thing, then we know they're undercounting it compared to CO2 at least.
Right. Yeah.
So everywhere it's being undercounted. Yeah.
Yeah. This is why when I hear that the numbers are all coming from the FAO, which is full of industry scientists.
Yeah. Yeah. Meat Secretariat.
I mean, I would never embark on an engineering project where I know that the data that I'm getting is garbage. Right?
I lost you for a second, but I'm back.
No, I would never embark on an engineering project knowing that the data I'm getting is from tainted sources.
For sure. Yeah. It's like, let's do a pipeline assessment directly from ExxonMobil.
Right. Yeah, the tobacco company telling us how good tobacco smoking is. Right?
Yeah, the lung analysis directly by Camel cigarettes. Yeah. Yeah, that's not what we want at all. Yeah, so that's huge. And that's why I also do, when I'm going through the data so many times, the study that has made it to the mainstream, whether it's about butter and health, goes right back to, say, the dairy industry, the National Dairy Council. And yeah, in your case with the FAO, they're partnered with the International Meat Secretariat and the International Dairy Federation or something like that.
Right.
And that's
Egg Producers Association too.
The what association?
The Egg Producers Association.
Oh, they are. Yeah. Oh, that's bad. I didn't know that. So you see that shift. It was where livestock's long shadow in 2007, livestock was the main source. And then you see they partner in 2012. And then in 2014, they come out with another report saying, yes, it's still a source, but it's not the main source anymore. It's actually significantly less than we thought, like 40% less. And so it's frustrating because we don't want to throw away all trust in all institutions, but it creates, actually is dangerous because it creates legitimate fodder for some conspiracy theories and stuff that leave people just completely disillusioned and denying everything in science altogether. So we got to be careful, got to strike a balance.
Yeah. So we always have to have that caveat, when we say something, it came from this source. So we really don't know. Most likely it is worse than what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. Yeah, the same thing happened across the board. We see it, it's happening with the meat industry coming at choline, trying to say choline is absolutely necessary in super duper high amounts. And that was coming directly from the egg and meat industries, which are trying to market choline, as well as the choline supplement industry into the guidelines and stuff like that. It's almost in every aspect. And the frustrating part is that the news cycle doesn't pick that up almost ever. And in fact, they probably, in a lot of times, not to be too conspiracy again, they're actually designing the whole thing from the ground up. They've got press people who are working with these, even sometimes directly. We know that they're directly paying bloggers to say this stuff and not include the information like that it was funded directly by the industry because they don't legally have to. And then the big, we always have a pipeline of like the BMJ right down to the Daily Mail. And that's what happened recently. My most recent video was on bone fractures. And it wasn't even a study that was funded by industry, to my knowledge. I should probably look closer. Usually I do a full analysis of every author, but it was by a German government organization or major German organization, which I should look closer again because I was so focused on the actual data in there. But you see instantly the study comes out. It has very mild results that are very, there's things that are not that compelling about it. And then the Daily Mail comes out and says, beware vegans, poor bone health due to nutritional deficiencies of vegans. And then you look in the study and you go, well, actually, of the two bone metrics that they looked at, ultrasound metrics, one of them wasn't different at all, which is like a major metric, speed of sound, was not different at all, how fast sound travels through your bones. And then the other one was only 5% different. And even the vegan group had very good bone quality compared to the average person. So these are just a bunch of people with really good bones. The vegans were ever so slightly lower. And then they say it was due to deficiency in things like vitamin A and vitamin B6 and the amino acid lysine. Well, you look at the deficiency ranges, no vegan. First of all, the vegan group was, for example, in vitamin A, 3 times higher than the deficiency cutoff, even though in the subtext of the Daily Mail, it says vegans were deficient in vitamin A. And it's just so frustrating. And I even ran like a little data analysis of a normal distribution to see how bad the lowest person would be in those groups. And they were still above the deficiency cutoff line. So these people, it's not impossible to say maybe one person was, but based off the statistics, these people were not deficient. And yet the Daily Mail can just run with it. Vegans have horrible bone health. If you go vegan, you're going to get horrible, but like actually it was an epidemiological study, which, as you know, can't determine causation. Small, 30 people in each group. And then they're saying it leads to, it causes worse bone health. So that's this kind of stuff I deal with. And I understand I am doing a lot of the health stuff. Health dominates my channel because this stuff is coming out all the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's always, who's funding it. Ultimately, in a system where the profit motive is funding studies and funding the journalism, you have to assume that the main driver is the profit motive. I mean, when I started working, I actually started working at Bell Labs, and I went to Bell Labs because I thought the profit motive was not the one that's driving research.
A nice view of the world.
It's supposed to be like publicly funded. It used to be funded by just raising your telephone rates. So you go and tell the Public Utilities Commission, we need an extra $1 billion for research next year, and the rates go up, and we get our money, and we do our research, right? So that's how it worked. And of course, they broke that up and said, no, we are going to have to make money on this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, get people's data eventually and stuff. Yeah, and that brings me to another interesting thing is even if the study wasn't funded by research, you have this almost like anti-vegan bias profit machine where if you can just come out with a press title that makes vegans look really bad, that is a profit motive. And so that's what the Daily Mail is doing. They're taking a study that didn't really show any. In fact, you could take the same study and say, the longer you are vegan, the denser your bones are, because the study showed when they broke the bone quality groups into tertiles, they found that the longer somebody, that the densest group, the highest quality bone group, was vegan for way longer than the lower quality bone group. So they were vegan for over 8 years. And then the slightly lower one was vegan for about 5 years. And then the lowest bone density group was vegan for about 3.5 years. So you see, you could actually argue that you could print, based off the same study, you can print press things saying vegans have way better levels of folate, and it's a certain amino acid when their glutamine was even high, statistically significant higher. They have in fact, the vitamin D was higher vitamin D levels, and all these things, as well as on and on and on. And then longer you are vegan, the denser your bones are. Like you could actually publish the same on the same study, you could publish a completely different article that is pro-vegan, although obviously the bone density was ever so slightly lower. Probably not. And I actually talk about how that could have been based off the BMI, because in my opinion, the BMI was not properly matched. The vegans were significantly lighter, in my opinion, even though it wasn't statistically significant because it was a small group. They had more people on the lower end of normal BMI, where you see a kind of drop off in bone density because you're lighter. You don't have as much stimulation to grow bone density. You don't need as heavy of bones usually, or at least that's how we've evolved to not need them. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, capitalism depends on human supremacy.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
If you cannot dominate the animals, you cannot just raise down their forests whenever you want to produce your new products. How can you run a business, right?
Yeah. Human supremacy is a real thing. I think that's also part of the reason that people are engineers, as I was joking about earlier, is because they are benefiting from the current system of supremacy that exists. And the same thing exists with racial issues as well. The same reason we ignore racial issues, at least the majority group who has the advantage ignores racial issues. It's the same thing with animals, for sure. They're more likely to ignore the system that makes them feel superior. And man, it's the idea of animal supremacy. So I saw a TikTok last night, and it's this guy, he's riding this horse in the most arrogant way possible. And it's just a perfect example of somebody who's trying to be like, he could be riding a dirt bike, but you could tell there's this extra element of like, I'm dominating this animal. But it was funny because all the people in the comments who probably eat meat were actually picking up on this. It was like, some people just shouldn't own animals and leave the animal alone, and it's funny how because they probably don't ride horses, yet they eat meat, and they would never make a comment. Even if somebody was riding a cow like that, they would be like, haha, Anyway, so it's a huge psychological issue. And I think I need to make a video about that as well. I haven't touched on that.
Yeah, that is fundamentally, that is the bedrock, the cultural bedrock on which all other forms of supremacism flourish. Without human supremacism, there is no white supremacism. There is no male supremacism. You can't do that, because if you are not superior to an animal, how can you feel superior to another human being?
I bet that's an interesting point. I think I would have to think about that more, because I do think I still imagine before, well, I guess you still in like the indigenous Americas where they weren't domesticating animals yet. I think there were still a significant amount of like warring tribes and stuff. And so I think as a rule, that's absolutely accurate for a lot of situations. But I just have to think about that more.
Yeah,
like how far does that
fascinating study. Yeah, it's fascinating to think about that.
Yeah.
Here, I'm actually working on a course for sustainability.
Nice.
Yeah, we are starting something called Climate Healers Academy. Where so we're looking at what kind of curriculum needs to happen. Right? It's not just engineering. It's really about culture. It's about storytelling and what kind of stories we tell to people, and how do we tell these stories? Is it just through videos? I mean, do we have other means to tell stories that engage people? Have you looked at any other means of engaging people?
Well, I'm constantly thinking about it, but I'm constantly frustrated with a lack of data. For example, how effective is somebody just getting out there on the street and talking to people? And we just do not know at all. Like, I have a lot of friends that's what they do. They don't really make videos, but they'll get out there and they'll do either one of those cubes of truth or just like do some random conversational activism. And, it's one by one, but then you never know. Well, first of all, you never know what the effect is. And I feel like you can have a backfire effect sometimes with those people and they double down on their beliefs. But then if you get somebody to shift their beliefs, they could maybe become a powerful activist down the road. You just don't even know. But for me, the obvious thing is video. I mean, I can instantly reach thousands of people. Luckily, I'm grateful to have a platform like that. I do, what I do think is lacking is like things like AM radio. Right. That has completely formed the perspective of a large group of like older white people. We think about, not to get too political, but like Rush Limbaugh being on the internet, being on the radio waves for what was it, like 40 or even 50 years, talking about, things against climate change really as well. Even just leaving it at climate change. Like the amount of, I would say, damage that he did in terms of the view of climate change, not even talking about other issues again, is unbelievable. And that's because he is pretty much the only voice about these things on things like AM radio or talk radio. I don't even know if he's on AM or FM, but AM radio is the one I think of where there's absolutely no representation of this type of stuff. So if you were to create some type of like radio station that is either mirrored out to like rural America, where all of the most denialist people are, and whether you had some local hosts there or not to make things more relatable, that's one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most untapped things possible. But then it's also thinking about globally, really. I mean, I saw this Guardian article being like, China is shifting away from meat consumption and it's all happening, but that's not really what the data show yet. And so people who can translate things into Chinese and get, unfortunately, I'm just going to say videos again, but taking videos and bringing them places that they normally don't get to, that's another huge untapped one, in my opinion. So radio, that's untapped. Who knows? Maybe there's an effective way to do some like billboard things as well that's cost effective. And in fact, there's people that do math on that. Like, here's how many eyes see it. Here's the reaction that people are going to get. But that's kind of my take. I wish I knew more. I wish I had more data.
Yeah, it's also, who are we targeting, right? So are we targeting the older demographic, or are we targeting the younger generation? I mean, I personally feel that the younger generation is where the transformation potential is maximum.
Yeah,
right? So
for sure.
and and as they shift, they're going to pull the older generation along with them. I mean, that's how I feel it's going to happen. The older generation tends to be more stuck on listening to AM radio.
Yeah.
Which is
That
old
is true.
technology.
Yeah. And man, that's interesting. I just don't know which way. I don't know which way the best idea. However, I do have a question for you then. What are your views on like cell cultured meat or lab grown meat, if you want to call it that, in terms of being part of the solution?
Well, first of all, if it is a solution, it's a very transitional solution. Okay? It's not going to be a permanent solution. Why? Because we know it is bad for you to eat that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
No matter where it came from. Because it just accumulates toxins from the environment. Because fundamentally, we have poured so much of these toxins into the environment, they're not going anywhere. They're still there. And every year we are adding another 250 billion tons. I mean, it's crazy what we're doing to the environment, right?
Well, I'd have a question for you then, because lab-grown meat can be, you can determine what's in it a little bit more. For example, you can lower the saturated fat content,
right?
And then you can also technically, you have a plant-based medium, right? That's what they're starting to do, and so you could potentially have a pretty low toxin result compared to meat, the way that meat bioaccumulates in an animal and is very, very inefficiently grown. So I haven't seen the toxic numbers on that,
right.
But my view is that there's a portion of those people, those older people, right, especially, who they grown up eating meat. They just like the idea of eating meat. It's extremely frustrating to people like me, but they're going to die. They're going to go to the grave eating animal meat. And so if you can just sneak in a bunch of that lab grown meat, so that, because they don't really care what, they eat all this hormone injected stuff anyway. They don't really care about the ingredients, just slip it into those processed meats slowly. I mean, if you could replace the whole supply, then you're not killing any animals anymore. And people are tricky. Anyway,
they're actually starting to do that with the plant-based meats. They're adding like 50% plant-based meat and
other Subway.
Yeah, they're doing stuff like that. So I think that may be a way to go because I think the cost of creating lab-grown meat is still going to be very high. Okay,
but what if you did get it down?
That's a what if that I don't see the engineering process that makes it happen. Mm-hmm. It's not like chips, right? So like silicon chips, we can make it happen because it keeps shrinking. So we are making more and more chips on the same wafer. And you can't do that with meat because you're eating the same amount.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the idea, though, is if you can get a plant-based medium that's cheap enough, right? If you start doing large scale, like in that way, you do large scale fermentation of the different proteins and stuff, or not even proteins, but like, for example, I know that they were having some issues getting some like of those more subtle hormones in there, which is gross to even think about that, where you even needing to get hormones in there. But if you can just mass produce those in a cheaper way, in the same way that we've mass produced insulin, for example, by having fermenting it, then all of a sudden your growth medium becomes really cheap. And then you can grow a lot more for a lot cheaper. Like I already know the burgers come down from like $100,000 to $9 or something, $12 a burger. So I guess I have a slightly more like I'm more dependent on. Yeah, I have a more optimistic technological view of it than you. But I totally understand any hesitation, especially because the idea of just still putting animal cells in your mouth is gross. But if we can take, let's say it's a process where every year. Great scenario. Every year we're getting 1 billion people to go vegan. Mm-hmm. You're still going to have, or let's say 500 million people. You're still going to have 15 years where you're going to have people eating, 90% as much, 80% as much, 50% as much. But then if we can take that, set 50 billion animals that are killed a year and bring that down as much as possible in the transition. Right. For me, that's like a no. If we can do that, that's a no-brainer for me, because you're no longer harming those animals. They're literally not in the equation. And the environmental impact is also way lower, and from what we're being told from that meat as well. No methane.
Yeah. Ultimately, we need to get to a whole food plant-based system, right? I mean, that's where we are all headed, healthy, so that we are our purpose is not to sit there and gorge on food. Our purpose is to serve someone, right?
Yeah.
Serve the environment, serve the earth. And I think that's where we're headed as a system. Okay? We have to create that system so that people lead their normal lives and the planet thrives.
And hey, my cookbook is Mike's whole vegan cookbook about whole plant foods. So I'm right. I mean, I'm right there. I'm all about whole foods as well. It's just, yeah, I'm just trying to be like, what is every solution? Give me that solution.
I know.
But I'm just so impressed with also all the plant-based solutions, and they're also processed foods. But I mean, now they've just came out with some 3D printed quote unquote steaks, completely plant-based, and they just sort of extrude the texture in a different way that people are like they just had a demo in Israel where they completely sold out 2 trucks full. And people were, you have interviews with people being like, this is exactly like the quote real thing, which is funny. But again, satisfying that taste need is huge. And then they're doing smoked salmon as well somewhere in Europe. I can't remember if it's Austria or something. 3D printed smoked salmon. So so we have on plant-based. So we have all of these, I believe that's plant-based. So we have all of these solutions that are coming at us, and then the burgers that people think are real as well. That it just makes me so happy to see that, because if you can convince people that the taste is, if they believe the taste is the same, what argument do they really have? Because they're at the end of the day, it's cultural inertia, and for most people, it's pleasure though. So,
right. Reminds me that Tabay Atkins and his mom, Sahel, they claim to have made burgers that taste exactly like regular burgers. I mean, meat burgers, and they're whole food plant-based. So.
Nice. I'd be curious to see how they make that. It's not impossible. There's just a general thing where like whole plant foods are just not as calorie dense, and it's beneficial. I mean, that's what's hurt so much of the US in terms of obesity, is how calorie dense the food is. So in one way it's a win, but then, in order to fully recreate that sensation, you have to have really high, you have to have higher saturated fat, just the way it hits the tongue, which is annoying. Or at least that helps. And then high calorie density, because if you go away, if you're expecting like a 400 calorie burger and then patty or whatever, and you walk away with 120 calorie, like black bean burger, like people are just going to be like, what's going on in my stomach? I'm unsatisfied. I could never be vegan, And so you gotta at least explain to them that there's a calorie difference here, and that it's helpful for them in virtually all cases.
They can actually eat more. Right?
Yeah, you can finally, and that's actually a big thing, which kind of hints that we have such a high plant intake past, is that the reason people are over consuming calories is because their stomach is designed to take in all that fiber. And if you don't have it there, it literally doesn't trigger, like those elastic cells around your stomach that you're full. You go, oh, there's not enough plant fiber in there. I need to keep eating.
Right.
And then we get the standard American diet.
Right. Exactly. Hey, it was great to have this conversation with you, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
For joining us, and I'm sure people are gonna come and look at your YouTube channel. Can you post the YouTube channel?
I'm just on the back end of your stuff, but you can just type in MIC the Vegan into YouTube. Any of those social media things, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, even now. Just type in Mike the Vegan like a microphone, or I believe like you see on the screen.
Okay.
And you should be able to find me very easily. I think it might be youtube.com/Mike the Vegan as well. I can't remember if I hammered that one down, but all of the other social media things /Mike the Vegan, Facebook /Mike the Vegan, things like that.
Perfect. I added it.
Great. Thank you so much for that. All right. Well, great to talk to you. It's always nice to see someone looking for some solutions to the environmental stuff, because even in the vegan movement, it's a lot of focus on animals, which I love. Right. But, people aren't thinking about the science of the environment as much as I like to. So it's always nice to talk about that.
Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.